From Fremont, California, this is the Smokie Podcast, a production of the Smoke Signal covering everything from student life to what's happening in the world, all in short 20-minute episodes. I'm Bryan Xiong, the web co-editor of the Smoke Signal. I'd like to welcome you to the first episode of Season 4 of the Smokie Podcast. On this episode, members of the Smoke Signal discuss fears they have or had, and how they chose to deal with or adapt to them.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Smokie Podcast. I'm staff writer Sahas Goli.
Praamesh Siva
and Aaryan Suri.
And today we'll be talking to you guys about many of the fears that we as students have. So welcome to this episode of Smokie Podcast. So as Halloween approaches on the 31st of October, many students are getting ready to dress up as scary supernatural things such as skeletons, vampires, and so on. But there are also many more realistic fears that many of us experience on a day-to-day basis. So today we'll be talking about some of those fears and how we've been handling them or managing them or otherwise just avoiding them. So let's get right to it.
So one of the biggest fears that high schoolers tend to have is the fear of missing out. You know, you see your friends or family attend certain events or experiences and you weren't able to go for one reason or another, and it ends up being a really big regret that you couldn't go. There were many times in my life where I couldn't make it to parties or school events. Like, for example, I couldn't go to Spring Fling last year or HCX this year. And the primary cause of this is because of extracurricular activities. I'm involved in cross-country, track, Relay for Life, DECA, and I like to prioritize my time on school. So one of the big examples of this was when in freshman year, I was in Bollywood Air Band, and they had a big photo shoot at Ohlone College, and they all came super dressed up with kurtas and things like that. And I didn't go because I wanted to study for my bio test, and I thought it'd be a better use of my time if I spent time studying for that rather than trying to take photos. And so I later regretted this decision when I saw them post all their pictures on Instagram, and I felt really left out. It was like I wasn't even a part of the air band, and it sucked. And these type of things still happen, and it's really challenging to deal with.
Yeah, and I've had lots of similar experiences, such as Praamesh, in which I realized that I can't be everywhere at once, right? And it kind of just comes down to realizing where your priorities are. And a lot of the time, I'm like, I just have to go through the thought process that if I can't be at this place, I can maybe be at this one. And it just kind of comes down to balancing your priorities.
Yeah, for sure. As Praamesh mentioned, seeing things on social media definitely sucks when you can't be there. And I think a lot of the times, like nowadays, social media pictures and otherwise, a timeline sort of serves as proof that you were there or you were part of it. So not having any of not being part of that kind of sucks. But as Aaryan said, you can't be everywhere at once. You can only be in one place at a time. So it's really up to us on a personal level to choose what we prioritize more. And I think that if we can make that conscious decision, I'm doing this because I cannot do this, or I'm doing this because I value this more, I think it really helps with the guilt because we can be confident in our decision. And then later when we look back on it, we don't have to regret it because we know that we already weighed both options or multiple options and decided this one was the best to invest our time in. But yeah, it's definitely something that takes a lot of work, especially because, we're all social creatures, as our teachers like to say. So we all need to work together and see if we can resolve this, because I know a much better way of doing that would be to coordinate timings in order to make sure you don't have conflicts. But realistically, all of us have so much things going on in our lives that that's not very possible. So yeah, once again, it comes down to prioritization.
And then I think that the fear of missing out especially ties into the fear of not meeting expectations in a way that a lot of the time mission students especially focus on meeting all of their academic goals rather than actually spending time out and just having fun, right? So I think that one of the fears that I often had was the fear of not meeting expectations, whether those be set by my parents, set for myself, or set by my peers. I was always kind of nervous that I might let people down, and it's definitely been one of my hardest fears to overcome. And the two-edged sword, or the double-edged sword about this, is that this can often be a motivating factor, but over time it also becomes very toxic, since it can be very motivating knowing that I have to meet these expectations. And the thing about expectations in the long run is that meeting expectations can kind of be a double-edged sword, in the sense that it also motivates you to meet those expectations. However, in the long run, if you're only getting validation from others and not from seeking that validation yourself, it can also become a very toxic mindset to have.
Yeah, I agree with Aryan. It's really hard to like be able to like function properly if all you think about is like how others perceive you. I've also had this fear for a long time. I used to live in Minnesota for like until I was like 7 years old, and then my family moved from Minnesota to California because the mission area had really high national rankings for the school. So they made a lot of sacrifices. Like they had to change their job, and they had to leave behind like my aunt and uncle, who were like their brothers and sisters, and it was really tough. It was a really tough transition, but they thought it was like best for my future, and they had a lot of faith in me and my brother. And so when I first moved here, I was super scared. My old school is a lot more diverse, and Mission was mainly just Asians, and it felt really competitive. I remember my first week at school, I heard a kid making fun of someone because they didn't know their timetables, and that made me feel really scared. Um, but it's definitely something that I've gotten better at, and what I've sort of realized is that you have to try and like focus on the things that you're really good at. For example, I'm really good at cross country and I'm on varsity, and I'm also doing well in school and things like that. So I like to focus on those things, and I try to surround myself with people of positive energy.
Yeah, for sure. Like as you guys said, a lot of the times, a lot of the expectations that we have, not apart from just the academic ones, like we were just talking about FOMO, right? Like a lot of people would expect you to attend events with your friends and so, and if you're not doing that, you could be come off as antisocial and so on. So trying to meet all these expectations can be really difficult. So as Pramesh said, oftentimes you can just focus on what you're good at because if that's something that you know you can meet your expectations or the expectations of others on, you can use that as a source of self-confidence and then use that to like help you motivate yourself to do other things better. And I know a lot of the times people say like, oh, set your own standards and then try to follow that through. And then like as long as you're satisfied with it, it's all good. But honestly, I feel like that's not super realistic for many people because like apart from just pressures from like our family and friends, like we're also going to be operating in a society, right? So I think that like rather than like trying to set things for yourself and then end up like failing in the greater society, I think like what you guys said about like trying to focus on what you're good at would be a lot more like realistic. And this is definitely something that's very difficult for people to like acknowledge because all of us have things that we're good at and bad at, and it's really like tough when we have to face the things that we're bad at. Like I know me personally, oftentimes like I tend to like get like decent grades when I study hard, but in junior year everything became so much more difficult. Now we have a lot more work, so it's I have to like reevaluate a lot of my like techniques that I've been using, and because of that, like it was kind of bad because I thought I was good at studying before, but now like I managed to like discuss with my friends, and I definitely think that since this is a fear that so many people have, discussing with others will always be beneficial. And like it was for me, like for me after discussing I managed to improve by quite a lot. But yeah, apart from that, there's also like the fear of like what happens when we actually fail these expectations, right? When we do fail these expectations, we often end up in like a compromising situation, like either socially or like personally, and we get really embarrassed about it. And I know that definitely sucks for me at least.
Yeah, and I think that fear of embarrassment has definitely been a big one for me, like over time, since I always thought that people would like only remember the embarrassing moments of me and not really like the times where I was thriving versus when I was down. And I think that like one of the prime examples of this was quite a couple years back when I was at the amusement park with my friends, and the person on the ride before me, I actually ended up vomiting, right? And I was like extremely like, afraid of embarrassing myself if I went on that ride and this happened to me too. So then I ended up like not going on the ride and staying back. And due to this, I kind of ended up missing out on an like, awesome experience, as my friends described it. So, which definitely sucked.
I've had this fear as well. So freshman year was like online, so I didn't really interact with that many people. But sophomore year, when we returned to in-person school, I was really scared of like embarrassing myself in front of like upperclassmen. I've never really been like an extrovert. Like I tend to be a lot more quiet, and I was like worried because it's really scary, you know, because I still felt like a freshman going into sophomore year, and I was really worried what they would say. And this especially happened when I started cross country. So the juniors and seniors, basically what happened was in varsity practice, they were running really fast, and I was in the way of their workout, and one of the upperclassmen got kind of annoyed. So that really had me super scared. But it turns out that later on in that season, I performed well at one of the races, and the upperclassmen apologized, and we all became friends after that. I started to hang out with them a lot more, and it improved my confidence as well.
Yeah, and then I think that one of the prime ways to kind of overcome the fear of embarrassment is just taking a step back and looking if you can remember at other people's embarrassing moments. Like if I went and looked at everyone in this room and could think of a single embarrassing moment of them, I would definitely struggle to do so and would not be able to come up with anything, right? So I kind of just have to take that and apply it to my own life and think that if I can't remember other people's embarrassing moments, I'm sure that they can't remember anything about my life either.
Yeah, for sure. Those are definitely the two main ways that I would think of to deal with this. First being, as Pramesh said, to solve the problem that you've been facing. But of course, that's really difficult, especially since if it's something that we've been super embarrassed about, chances are we've already tried and like failed or like we're unable to solve it. But I think Aryan's one is also like very realistic to apply because oftentimes like the world doesn't really revolve around us, right? If something embarrassing happened to us, chances are like people would laugh at it and then move on because nobody is really going to invest their like a big portion of their memory into remembering what you did and why you did it. So yeah, it's definitely something that I feel is a lot more like self like made up like or like more mental thing than like a lot of the other things that we've been discussing. But yeah.
So another fear that I have is the fear of like growing up, the future. It's pretty crazy knowing that we're gonna be seniors next year, and there's only one more year of high school. Time has really flown by like so fast. I can still remember when I first came here to California, I was like 2 feet tall, and now, so much has changed. I think I've grown a lot as a person, and it's been pretty crazy. One
Like you mean you've grown from 2 feet or
Well, grown both as like a human being and physically. I think one really big fear I have is like the old childhood memories will be gone forever. It's pretty sad, knowing that we'll be leaving Mission, and I'm scared that like I'll be moving away from like friends and family. Um, it's really scary because I've lived here for like over half my life, and it's hard to imagine being in a place like without my parents or my brother or like my best friends from cross country and track. So it's definitely a tough thing to think about.
Yeah, and I think that the fear of growing up and kind of like the future is definitely my most recent fear. And I think this definitely hit me like a bus like a month ago after junior homecoming day when I kind of realized that like all this hard work and everything that I poured into this was gone and I only really had one more time to experience it. And I think that this is definitely similar to the fear of not meeting expectations, in which is kind of like a double-edged sword, in which a lot of the time I'm scared of not having these experiences again in my entire life. While on the other hand, I'm also excited to grow up, meet new people, and kind of climb, I guess, the social ladder in life.
Yeah, for sure. As you mentioned, homecoming. Every time we get like a periodic event, like an annual event, like every time we hit one, I feel like it's sort of like counting down the time we have left, right? Like as you said, homecoming. This is like our second to last homecoming that we had this year. And we'll have one more in our senior year, and then that'll be it. We'll be going to college, and I feel like this really brings into perspective how close we are to the future that we've just been like putting off as intangible. Like for us, it's just we've got like one more year until we've got to get working on college applications, which could potentially then affect our future. So yeah, it's definitely a big fear that like gets stronger and stronger the more you grow up, and especially since we're now hitting that age where we're being more responsible for ourselves. So we can't just rely on our parents to be like, oh, our parents will handle it because they can't anymore. At this point, we are being a lot more independent.
And aside from growing up as well, another fear I've had, one of the big ones, is like the fear of like the competitive nature of Mission. It's always been pretty tough academically with course rigor and things like that. I really felt this when we returned to in-person school because I knew that we were going back, and I knew it wasn't going to be as easy as freshman year was. Like I knew it was going to be a lot tougher. Um, and what I kept in mind was just make sure not to procrastinate. I decided to be more consistent with how I studied the material and things like that. I would review my notes for 10 minutes every day, and I actually think I succeeded with these tactics because I did pretty well.
Yeah, and I think that although I'm not able to maybe overcome my issue of procrastination, I can always follow the PP method, which is procrastinate and power through. With procrastination, I think it's an old habit that I'm never going to be able to lose. But in the end, I think I just kind of acknowledge that and roll with it. And then as for the second part of the PP method, the power through, that's just kind of goes to like show and like dedicate the hard work that oftentimes like the midnight oil that I'm burning to deal with the procrastination that I pulled.
Honestly, though, that's a very interesting method, and I kind of have to agree that even if I don't believe in it, I follow it. So I guess that explains a lot. But as I mentioned earlier, like when I was struggling, like I talked to other people and they helped me because academic competition, since many grades and mission don't actually come relative to each other, where students get ranked or so on, it's a lot more beneficial for students to work together. And as a result, I found that just talking to other people was really helpful because like no matter what problems you're facing, chances are they're not very unique to you, right? Like you're a mission kid, and so is a person next to you, and so is a person next to them, and so on. So a lot of these like grade-based issues will be very similar because most people are taking similar classes. Like the person you're sitting next to in calculus is also taking calculus, right? So if you talk with them and like sort of like share your concerns, chances are you'll find some solution that somebody else has found because we're only one person and we can't think of everything, right? So yeah, today we talk about many different types of fears. We talk about many different ways that we handle them as well. And I think one of the main like takeaways from this podcast, for me at least, is that a lot of these things are just in our head, right? Like the fear of embarrassment and the fear of missing expectations or failing expectations are kind of things that we've constructed in our own minds as a result of like whatever challenges we've been facing so far. And I feel like if we just sort of change our perspective on this and look at it from a different angle, or to just take a step back from the situation and try to view it as a third party, we'd realize how ridiculous some of these things are. And I think this would be really beneficial for our mental health and just our sanity in general, because we can't always be fearing this or fearing that. So yeah, I think it's just a lot of it can just be fixed by a change in perspective or a change in mindset.
Yeah, I think we've had a great discussion today. And with all that being said, thank you all for listening to the Smokie Podcast. Be sure to check more from us at thesmokesignal.org, and we'll spook you next time. This is
Sahas Goli,
Praamesh Siva,
and Aaryan Suri signing out. Thank you for listening.
We want to thank Sahas Goli, Praamesh Siva, and Aaryan Suri for joining us on this episode of the Smokie Podcast. Our background music is produced by Lucrembo, and our show is edited by Jennie, Wang, and Bryan. See you next time on the Smokie Podcast.